Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stuart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look.
Well, good evening, everyone, and we're very fortunate to have Barry Rothman with us, who does a lot of work on the Torah codes, and we have Larry with us on his mountaintop and binoculars, surveying the world. Hi, Barry. How are you doing?
Yeah, real well. It's been an interesting week or two, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it certainly has been. And Larry, how are you?
Oh, just so glad that Barry's with us tonight and can lead us into some real interesting code work.
Yeah, let's start with this Space Force. You know, we've had a lot of, and really the Space Force, in my opinion, dovetails right into Barry's work on time travel. And the reason I say that, maybe we can get into a little bit of that as well, but you ran a Bible code, Barry, on the Space Force. You want to enlighten us more on that?
Sure. When President Trump came out and announced he was going to create a Space Force out of the Air Force, basically out of Space Command that's in the Air Force right now, I just took a look in the codes to see if there was anything about it, and I was just amazed at what I saw. First of all, the term Space Force is encoded in the Torah, and where it's encoded, lo and behold, 2 columns to the left at the same absolute skip was Trump, so he's parallel to it. You can put Space Force together in, let me see, it would be 7, 8, 9, 10, in 30 letters with Trump, which is an extremely close meeting. Now, I went up and looked a little bit above that, and the total matrix size I'm talking about here is only 95 letters, which is a very small matrix. And we see that Mars is encoded at the same skip as Trump and the same absolute skip as Space Force. So that was amazing. 5-letter word for Mars, Moedim is what it is in Hebrew. And, of course, the Space Force is created to theoretically fight a war in space. Well, the word Mars, Moedim, the last letter, which is an M, a mem in Hebrew, is the first letter in the open text of Malchama, which is war. So you have Mars and war intersect, and you have, again, Mars, Space Force, and Trump all at the same skip in 95 letters. And that is not likely to occur by chance. In fact, the odds against it are 12,153,098 to 1, approximately.
Wow.
So, if anybody's interested. Now, when I put this up, I have to tell you, I'm going to mention a little bit right now. Hopefully I won't get too much in trouble with them. But I saw, not surprisingly, a lot of U.S. military come to read this article. And it's an extensive article. But I did not know when I put up the article how extensive the following was in the Defense Department, because I normally don't record Defense Department visitors when they come to my site. But I do record NASA, and I do record the Kremlin when they come. And the reason I record the Kremlin is that I know that Department of Defense is following my stuff. Every once in a while, I'll take a whole list of all these people and pass it on to a friend in DOD so they can see what, the Russians are interested in. And I have to tell you that the joke was on me, because this past week, by accident, I went to copy an IP address, which tells me who's going to be there or who's there, and I missed a digit. And when I pasted it into my IP tracker, it came up at one particular Defense Department establishment, and I realized that what I thought I was going to see was NASA. I went back and then checked, and immediately 500 NASA visitors converted over to this one Defense Department agency or place. And then I had about 1,000 lists of Russians that had come over, I thought, had been listening, at least tracing to the Kremlin, and a large percent of them was the same thing. It was still the same fort, the same area in the United States. So the interest of Department of Defense is much greater than I thought it was in space. Last night I had been listening to a guy by the name of John Brandenburg. I think we probably mentioned him before. He seems a little kooky, but he's a plasma physicist. He's got a Ph.D. He thinks there was a nuclear war on Mars a few 100 million years ago. And, he's published, in things like the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference or Proceedings. He worked, I believe, for NASA for a while. And anyway, I'm listening to this, and he tells me, or he says on the thing, that there's actually a Mars desk in the Pentagon. So there's stuff that's going on over there. And clearly they're interested enough in what I find with both the Torah codes and with Mars that they're not missing anything. So how often are they coming here? Checking back as much as I could over the last few weeks, I'd say I get one hit from them on an average of every 30 minutes, maybe more often than that.
Wow.
And that is an extreme interest, to say the least. Torah codes, especially the idea that all this stuff is encoded in the first 5 books of the Bible. I've suggested that this could be something the military could use for intelligence purposes. It seems to be that accurate. It needs to be combined with artificial intelligence. I don't want to get into too much, but if it was combined with AI for a search engine, I think it's something that's useful. How it got to be there is another matter, and that's where we get into time travel. But I'm just skimming down this article on the Space Force, and a lot of people want to know why create it. So there's 4 reasons I discuss in the article. The first one is just looking at the mission statement of Space Command, and that's basically to launch non-reusable rockets from right here in Cape Canaveral, where I live, or Vandenberg Air Force Base, so we put up our military satellites, our communication satellites, stuff like that. Nowadays, SpaceX is going one better with the recoverable, first stage at least they're putting up there. But that's one thing, just to put satellites in orbit. And to my way of thinking, I don't think we need a separate military branch to do that. I mean, the Air Force is doing it just fine right now. And you get all this duplication of effort if you go into an extra service. Got to buy new uniforms for everybody and so forth. So a lot of expenses with it. So I don't think that's the reason why the president is going to create this, or is going to try his best. At any rate, he's got to fight Congress. The second reason is an asteroid or a comet threat that may be out there. And here I got a hold of an 18-page plan called the National Near-Earth Object Preparedness Strategy and Action Plan. And I took a look through it, and I read it. It only took a few minutes for me to go through the whole thing. And all I have to say after reading it is, if this is what the government's got to protect us from asteroids, when one comes along, we're dead meat. This thing was this is an absolute piece of trash. Now, I'm not saying that as a guy who doesn't know anything about plans. I'm saying that as a man who had 6 admirals sign off on the war plans or standard operating procedures that I wrote. They usually average between 400 and 750 pages apiece. While I was on active duty at Coast Guard Pacific area, it was 2003 and 2007. So I wrote all these plans, and there's a format. It's called JOPS, Joint Operational Planning and Execution System, and that format has certain things that have to go in certain places that we look for in the military when we look for a plan. So, for instance, one of the plans that I wrote out there was the Disaster Contingency Plan. It was Coast Guard Op Plan 9800, and I talk about that a little bit in the article here. So here's the kind of things that you see. You have a basic plan that tells you what it's about. You have a task organization that tells you who are the relevant departments, who are the players. That's Annex A, or Alpha. Annex Bravo, Intelligence, Essential Elements of Information for Disasters. What do people have to know? What's the threat history? We got hit. The Russians got hit in Chelyabinsk, I think it was 2013, and it injured 1,500 people and 7,500 buildings were damaged. We had the Tunguska asteroid or comet impact, whatever it was, 1908, was equivalent of at least a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb. So people have to know what's the probability. Then you get into operations, and there are a lot of things that go into the operations section. But, you have to know if you're going to have an asteroid coming in, maybe there's something nuclear that goes off. So maybe a nuclear section. In terms of rules of engagement, usually that's Charlie 8, C8, Appendix 8 to Annex Charlie. And okay, if you got a panic, and when can you shoot people? If they're quick, you may have to do something to preserve order, and so on. After you go through all the operations, you're looking for logistics. What ammo do you need? Where are you going to put up people to sleep? Personnel. It goes on. Public affairs guidance, command relationships. All those things should be in there. Communications. All the reports, all these things are supposed to be in a plan. When I looked at this asteroid plan, exactly none of them appeared anywhere in there. The plan could have been written by somebody in 8th grade. So maybe there is a plan that has been written and it's on a secret level, and they didn't, or top secret level. It was a secret level. I never saw it, but and I had a secret clearance. Top secret. I didn't have that clearance. But maybe it's written out there someplace, I hope. But we don't have any indication of that. And this plan was just published in June of this year. So it's a new thing. It does not even refer to, as far as I could tell, any other plan that would be in a higher basis. So then the third reason for having a space force, we get into the extraterrestrial threat that you and I have spoken about before and everybody's concerned with, and I know it's real. And I've seen documentation that proves it. I discuss it on my website, but that's the most sensitive thing that I talk about. So right now I'm doing an article about the dust devil or the dust storms on Mars. But at the end of the article, I put a little note in there, and in terms of talking to DOD. And I mentioned something that I have one article on artcode.com. I have one on MarsCorrect.com that talks about the specific scientists who back-engineered what was found in Roswell in 1947. I name them in every country. I'm not supposed to be able to do that. And a curious thing is, a third site I have, website is my son's site. And we talk about the same thing on everything, what you can find on Mars Correct is on my son's site. Not so much vice versa. Some of the breakthrough propulsion physics articles that he writes here, I don't carry that on mine. I leave that on his site. But there's one article that I have on Mars Correct that names these people, at least the people who were working on it in 1960. And doggone, nobody comes to that site for the most part except Department of Defense. It averages one person a day, and I mentioned this last night that it looks like that they don't let anybody in most times unless I tell them specifically that they go there, and the Department of Defense is aware. I've just given somebody a heads up or whatever. The one article is that I mentioned last night. That as soon as I put it up, reference of it to it, Department of Defense was there, the usual people on that site at that page, saying, "Okay, we know. Yes, this is the page, and if you want to get access to the general public, you're going to take it down," which I don't plan to do. So the extraterrestrial threat is the third reason that you can have a space command. And then the fourth one is something that you mentioned earlier, which I wasn't planning on going too much, but there's a temporal threat. Apparently, I've seen some indications that, and this is real, I know they don't want to talk about this, so I won't go into it. I have been on shows before. The idea that there is some technology, or there will be develop some technology that allow the Torah codes to exist, or allow signals to go back in the past. Does not mean for sure that the Torah was written by a person in the future or an artificial intelligence in the future, but somebody has figured out how to send signals back in time, and I've dealt with that a little bit, and I got to be very careful there. But I would think, first of all, there's no such thing as space, really. There is space-time. You can't really talk about space without time and be accurate. I was driving to the commissary yesterday on Patrick Air Force Base, and I passed the runway there, and think back in time. I'm 71 right now. When I was 21, I flew in there in a T-28 that I piloted from Pensacola, Florida, with a best friend. And I said to my wife, you know what? If you look on that runway right over there, if we could see back in time right now, you're going to see a Barry Rothman. He's got a full head of hair. He's not going to have this pot belly. He's going to be such a handsome guy. I wonder if you would fool around with him if you had a chance. And she said, would you be angry if I did? I said, well, as long as I remember what I got, it's all right. But that space is there, but it's not the same time. So you can only describe, things with the four coordinates, up, down, right, left, back, forward, and the time. And so the Space Command should really, I think, be the Space-Time Command, because once you get good enough technology, I think it is possible to travel in time. And that's something that has to be defended against if other civilizations that were around for a long time develop that. I mentioned Brandenburg, and I'm going to stop in a minute here and let you go. But Brandenburg's idea there was a nuclear war on Mars in the past, he's not talking about 100 years ago or 50 years ago. He's talking about several hundred million years ago. So he was talking about, well, why destroy a civilization that was Bronze Age with something that was like a million megaton nuclear bomb? Why would anybody do that? He spoke about the fact that there's evil, and he doesn't know the reason why, if it happened, assuming it really did happen. But, if we had civilizations around for that long, then the ability to develop all kinds of stuff, including devices that can travel in time, is possible. Supercomputers, I'll talk about tonight the possibility you could have a computer the size of Mars if it's set up the right way. All right, go ahead. I'll leave it to you guys to ask some questions, but go ahead. You're up.
Yeah, Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking, Barry, at something you've got recently, too, the Martian global dust storms and microorganisms. And
right.
I noted, too, I've seen this movie, Mission to Mars, a few times. You've got that post attached to it.
Yes,
one of the things down through here that I thought was interesting, can you see what you think about it? It's talking, says your seed like the dust of the earth. Could you go into that?
Yeah, okay. I got two matrices on here, and I was working on this article as recently as about 10 minutes before the show started tonight. This one's still under construction, but it's getting close to completion. I looked for the term dust storm in the Torah code. It's only 7 letters, but it has some less frequent letters in it, like Samach and Pei. It turns out it's only encoded once in the entire Torah. So in 304,805 letters of Torah, no matter how many times you go through it over and over again, you got one dust storm. That's it. So then, since you're thinking about the movie Mission to Mars, which I thought was pretty good, in fact, it's one of my favorite flicks. You had in the beginning of the movie, these people land on Mars, and a dust storm arises, or I guess a giant dust devil, along with a dust storm. And this thing actually interrogates the astronauts that are walking around there. It doesn't get the answer that it wants or that it's looking for, and so it sucks them up and kills them, except for one guy who got away. But it's intelligent. So, when I look at a dust storm, right now we have a global dust storm on Mars. It's one of the biggest we've seen. It's the only one that's actually hit the Mars Science Laboratory since it landed in 2012. We're getting some amazing information or data from it, and I'm learning so much from watching this storm in great detail and analyzing everything that NASA puts out and finding what's wrong with what they put out. But at any rate, I started to read an article by, let's see, the guy's name we have Wang. Huqin Wang. He's from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory in Cambridge. Mark Richardson is from Ashma Research in Pasadena. Now, I don't know if Mark listens in. I just about decimated Ashma Research. I showed that almost everything they had about Mars was wrong. So I'm not going to be a popular person out there. However, if Mark happens to hear this article, which was published in Icarus, is pretty good. It's called "The Origin, Evolution, and Trajectory of Large Dust Storms on Mars During Mars Years 24 to 30, which is 1999 to 2011. And as I read through the article, I'm reading about the fact that when you get a dust storm on Mars, you may have one that originates in the northern hemisphere and another at the same time that originates in the southern hemisphere, and they can start out thousands of miles apart. Fascinatingly enough, these storms can sometimes head towards each other and merge. And I thought that's weird. You can go years without a dust storm, and then you got one, at 40 degrees north and another one at 30 degrees south, and they're growing, but they start heading towards each other and they merge. Not all the time, but sometimes they do. He's got about 65 dust storms that he discusses in here, of which 2 went global, and they're incredible storms. But I started thinking, that kind of reminds me, we don't know what causes the lifting of dust on Mars. There's a popular theory called saltation that's out there, but I examined that in in the basic report of Mars Correct Critique of all NASA Mars weather data, and I found saltation to be lacking. And anybody's interested in it can just look for the report. But at any rate, looking at other causes for what could be, it dawned on me that when everything starts rising at one time, we see that in the ocean. We see that where all of a sudden corals will spawn, and you have sperm and egg that go up at the same time in the water. We see other things that when there's a full moon, certain plankton will descend. It's every 29 and a half days because they don't want to be seen in the night sky where there's light from the moon, and predators will be able to come along and eat them, so they descend. So there's a biological clock there. There are a number of other things that are with biology that are clocks. Here in Florida, around May every year, we get these mayflies that come out, and it's impossible. Whether you're up in Jacksonville or down in Miami or over in Tampa or here in the Cape, if you're driving around your car, your windshield's going to be splattered with 9 billion bugs. And it's for, they all start pretty much on the same day. You walk out to the beach here 2 days after it's over, and along the tide line, it's nothing but these love bugs, or these mayflies, whatever they are. That's all it is. They all come up at the same time. So maybe there is associated with Martian dust storm, with Martian dust, some kind of life. What kind of life would it be? Well, it could be bacterial. When you have dust coming in off of Africa to form hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean and come over here to the United States, along with that dust, we've measured out to 1,000 miles at sea bacteria on the dust. Dust mites. If you walk along and you kick up some dust on your floor and it's got dust mites on it, it takes anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours for those dust mites to settle back down. Dust mites can have wings, by the way, some species. So you could have a situation on Mars where something happens. It's only at certain times in the orbit of Mars around the sun that all of a sudden you get these things all go up at the same time, and they're lifting dust. We see it as a dust storm, and we haven't been able to get in there close enough to analyze what, microscopically on any of those grains of dust or whatever. And so maybe, there's life there. So that's one of the things that this article is about. But here, the phrase that I put in with dust storm is, "Your seed like the dust of the earth." Well, the word seed can also be sperm in Hebrew. But the idea, this is mating over here, and the comparison is with the dust of the earth. So that was in a box of 720 letters, along with Mars and intelligence and life. I found that on that box. That was against odds of about 16,924 to 1. The simple term, "your seed like the dust of the earth," was in that box against odds of 212 to 1. Now, the second term for the second matrix I have on here is based on the same ELS, the same equidistant letter sequence, the skip whatever of dust storm, but I use what's called a different row split. So instead of The ELS for dust storm is large. It's 147,775 letters. If I had a skip of 1, then if you can imagine a cylinder with that many letters as circumference, then that's what it would be. If you have a row skip of 2, you basically cut it in half. It's going to be 1 column off because it's not an even number. It's an odd number here. But it would be twice around to get through around the cylinder in order to get through the difference from one letter to the second and so forth. So the first one, I had a skip of 6. This is more than I usually use. All right. The second one, same term exactly, just presented with a skip of 3. So you have dust storm is still the axis term, and what comes up very, very close to it is sperm or seed after its kind, and that's found a couple of times in Torah. But the idea that you're getting these seeds, the idea that maybe something is arising here with the dust, and the word life touches dust storm on this one. The word intelligence touches it. The word Mars is there. A different finding of Mars from the previous one. I also have methane on here and machshav, which is brain or computer. Although I didn't include them in the end in the calculation because they were a little far off from, or required the matrix to be too big. The methane I was looking for because on Mars we have found methane in several places. And we think that it's more likely associated with life than it is anything geological. Of course, methane is the simplest molecule in organic chemistry. So all life is based on, building up methane molecules. And when you die, like they say, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Well, the last thing that your body will decompose to will be methane. So we start with that simple organic molecule, CH4, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens, and we wind up, that's what we go back to when it's all over and done, unless there's a resurrection before we get there, which, I'm hoping to see. The other term, machshav, for brain or computer, it's the same word, although I didn't include that in the significance calculation because it made the matrix a little bit big again. I have read a really fascinating book by Kurzweil recently, and about the so-called singularity. It's basically about how far computers are advancing or how fast they're advancing. And theoretically, he talks about you could, if you have communications between even simple life forms, you can have a tremendous computer, tremendous intelligence. So if you take one of your brain cells by itself, it doesn't do too much. But when you put those trillions of cells together and they're all connected, or interconnected, then you have the capability to be a human being. And he thinks that our technology in the not too distant future will be such that we will be able to make computers with artificial intelligence that far surpass anything that people are capable of right now. And I talk about AI and the Torah codes and what happens if you combine the two, and I think the possibilities are just about limitless. So anyway, that's the dust type thing. So this article. Basically, I do a few things here. I look at what's encoded with dust storm and life and Mars. This article will be copied over into MarsCorrect.com and into my son's site, DavidARoffman.com, minus the Torah codes, because the rest of the article is going to be an analysis of the dust storms, what we've learned on this one with this dust storm, where they initiate on Mars, and I also go into whether or not there could be any link with Brandenburg's ideas of a nuclear war in the past. Now, why do I do that? I do that because, according to Brandenburg, there's 2 areas on Mars that have high concentrations of the kinds of radioactive isotopes that are only associated with nuclear weapons, in particular hydrogen bombs. And those areas, the most common area is Acidalia planitia. So when I look at which is where Cydonia, that famous face is, when I look at this article in Icarus that I just read by Wang and Richardson, it says the number 1 area on Mars with dust storms is Acidalia planitia. And so of 65 storms, they're showing about 28 of them over here that initiated there. The second most frequent area where dust storms originate on Mars is Utopia Planitia. And Utopia Planitia is a place that is a frozen freshwater sea the size of the state of New Mexico or Lake Superior. So this is a relatively recent discovery. Some people ask, well, what happened to the seas of Mars? Well, at least one of them froze over. Why doesn't it look blue from orbit? Because it's covered with a few feet of dust over the ice. And so it's camouflage. But from orbit, we have measured the depth of it. We know what's there. And so the water did not all leave Mars. There's a good bit there. When I look at a globe, a topographical globe of Mars, like the one that I have here, Sky and Telescope sells some great ones, by the way, like I have. I see that Utopia Planitia is about the same altitude, or low altitude. I mean, way below what the equivalent of sea level would be as the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. So I would assume that if we did a study of the rest of the Northern Hemisphere, we'd find that the great bulk of the original oceans are all there, all there. So if we warm the planet, we got instant oceans, to cover maybe close to half the planet. So Utopia Planitia is not only an area where the ranks number 2 in dust storms, but as I look at the maps that Brandenburg presented for where radioactive potassium and thorium is on Mars, lo and behold, it seems to coincide with Utopia Planitia. So at least ranking number 1 and number 2 for dust storms and for radioactive activity, the same areas. I haven't looked for the correlation with the other areas yet, but when I say I'll publish this separately, the Torah codes confuses the issue with a lot of people. So, a lot of people just say, it's got something to do with religion, it's nuts, or this is some kind of religious fanatic. And I'm looking at a code which is obviously, I've got 1,300 articles up about this and probably close to 7,000 matrices. It's enough to keep the Department of Defense here every 30 minutes around the clock for at least 4 years now. I didn't think it was that long. It's funny. I have a PowerPoint up about the Torah, about Mars, and all my research. And until yesterday, it had 65 slides. But then yesterday, I looked at slides 63 and 4, and one was for all the visits for over a month for NASA, and the other one was the Kremlin. And knowing what I know now, how to break the code in a sense for how they get through, I saw that they were all the same Department of Defense fort. And so I took the slides down because it's misleading. It's not those folks. It's somebody else. But again, why are they here? And I think the answer has to do something with why the Space Force is being put together right now. As far as President Trump, I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about him and what happened with Putin. I'll tell you what I think happened. The president may have had some knowledge of what the situation is with aliens and this whole business. Not every president gets to know an awful lot. The meeting was one-on-one. I don't think that Trump wanted, and maybe this was at Putin's request, I don't know. I don't think he wanted anybody else in the room because we've seen so many times where somebody gets so high in our government and you can't trust the guy.
Yes.
I think that what Putin did was he probably said, look, we're allied in space. We have been a long time. For all the criticisms we hear about Russia, every party wants to show who hates Russia more. When I look out my front door and I watch an Atlas V go up, it goes up with a Russian engine on it, the RD-180. And where are we going? We're going to the ISS, the International Space Station, which we share with who? The Russians, who built part of it, about a fifth of it. We built the rest of it, pretty much. Maybe the Europeans had it, Japanese had a small sliver. But we go up and we share the space station with the Russians. And then how do we get back from orbit? On a Russian Soyuz rocket. So let's not be too silly about, we can't do anything with them. They're 100% untrustable. The reality is we go to space and we come back from space on Russian rockets, unless we have something else secret. Now hopefully we're going to see.
3.
Yeah, SpaceX is supposed to launch people 2 missions down. I think we're going to have this summer or later. I think later this summer, a test of the Dragon manned space capsule. 1 test. If it's okay, we're going to put up people the next shot. I think Boeing is likewise before the end of the year or sometime early next year. They'll send the capsule up once unmanned, and then they're going to try to use. And we better, because our contract with the Russians is expiring soon. So if we don't do this, we will not have a way to get to the International Space Station anymore, because the Russians are going to stop it. But we've had relations with them all the way back in terms of with what's going on with the alien situation, and so that's what NASA, that's what the Defense Department likes me to discuss the least. That's where they get angry and they make threats if I go into that too much. But what the world sees is so far from reality.
Yes.
And these politicians, this is the real deep state. I told you some what's happened to me in terms of not only figuring out that the level of monitoring that's going on, but I found out that looking at 3 hosts, that when I really looked to see were they legitimate hosts for the website, for websites, and all 3 of them traced back to the same fort, the same location, at least when I wanted to open a site. So, the true situation is not what we see, and it's very much an Orwellian world, and very much, we're told who to hate and who to love, and we can switch that, or the government can switch that around in 5 minutes, expect everybody to just go along with what the latest policy is. The reality is something very, very different. Torah code sees through it a lot, and that's one of the reasons why I look at it, to see what's there. And I say openly to the Department of Defense, you want to really know what's going on. You combine this with AI, I can't think of every term to search for myself, but an AI would know. And if there are classified terms, names of people that are secret that I'm not going to know, but the Defense Department, if they know what they're doing, could go in and say, okay, well, these are the real terms to search for, and then see what they get out of it. And they are going to get more out of it than I ever would, and it's going to be actionable intelligence from everything I see in 21 years of research with this stuff. So anyway, Larry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. I didn't know whether you wanted to mention the creator decoder or not, but
well, you just did. So that was a proposal that I wrote. It is still on my site, and in fact, it's addressed to primarily to these people I've told you about that have been monitoring my site so closely. Just an amazing number of hits that they give. But asking, and here this is going to sound very different from anything I've said before. I'm asking $2.9 million from the government if they want to go along with it. Why this money? I didn't get into Torah codes to make money. I don't make money from any of this stuff. At $2.9 million, $200,000. $2.9 million. The $2 million of it, I think, was all for the City University of New York. So, and then $100,000 of it was for Dr. Haralick, who's the department head there for their computer sciences, for the graduate division or whatever. Okay, so this guy who wrote the foreword of my Art Code book, distinguished professor, he's got the programming skills that are needed to a great extent. The deal was that he would be hired for this, and he would bring along 1 postdoc. He would bring along, I think it was 3 graduate students, and several undergraduate students would use the computer facilities of the City University of New York. And he says he can also get the access to the computer at Brookhaven, which is a laugh, and I'll tell you why in a little while. But he said he would bring that all into play. Then from Australia, we would hire Kevin Akers, who's the creator of the Code Finder program I use. He has to provide the source code, and he's a genius. What he created, nobody else in the world ever got close to making a program like that. I don't like the statistical analysis that it offers, but in terms of finding stuff, encoded, and finding it, incredibly fast. It's the best. Nobody came anywhere close to touching it ever. So that's to hire him. It leaves over about $800,000 over 4 years. So, and that it would be mine with the understanding as follows. Number one, I don't have AI skills. Now, Dr. Haralick does, and these other people at City University of New York, they have it. So does my son. So, although he's got a very good job right now, if we needed to hire him on a consultant basis, there would be money available for that. Frankly, he keeps pretty busy with what he's doing, and I think he's somewhat upset over the level of monitoring that's going on. But, he's kind of reserved about the whole thing, but he's looking. The rest of the money, that the name of my book, Ark Code, is about looking for the Ark of the Covenant using ELS codes in the Torah. The rest of that money would be dedicated for an expedition to to Egypt, to the area where I think the Ark of the Covenant will be found, where it's encoded to be found on numerous ELS maps, at 31 degrees 9 minutes north, 33 degrees 4 minutes east. So that's where I think the Ark is, in the El Zupa Peninsula of Egypt. I would need, to fund that expedition. Northern Sinai right now, there is a hotbed for terrorism. The Egyptian government is frequently clashing with people there. With a lot of times there can be 20, 30 army guys get wiped out. It's dangerous, and so we would need security. So we need the permission of the government. And we do anything in Egypt, the first thing you have to do is grease their palms. I came into this area a number of years back. I was only permitted there for 15 minutes. I was not permitted to take my metal detector, but I had to bribe a number of officials close to $500 to get access to that area, which is prohibited for foreigners to go into that area. But at least I took some pictures of the general area. So when I talk about another $800,000 left over, that's the idea, to get in there. If we can find the Ark of the Covenant, I think that changes the entire political landscape of the world. I think it does away with Islamic terrorism, because
so
they're going to see.
Why are they so restrictive on that particular area?
Well,
do they know something?
First of all, there is an Egyptian naval base that's just on the northern end of that. So the site where I want to go is 1 mile from that. It's pretty close. That's number one. Number two is that terrorists will frequently infiltrate northern Egypt, from the sea, and so they don't want that, but they don't want anybody getting in, going up to be able to meet any boats. This president of Egypt, El-Sisi, is a tremendous guy. He's a real friend of Israel, but before him, you have all these thousands of missiles that have been launched from Gaza, and you want to talk about that, into Israel. Well, before, all these Egyptian leaders allowed these missiles to come in from Iran to the port there, Port Said, and they'd be offloaded and then driven across the desert and then taken through tunnels from Rafah city in Egypt into Gaza, and they wind up being fired at Israel. So this guy has flooded the tunnels, and he's absolutely fighting all the terrorists that are over there in Gaza. He's a tremendous friend for Israel and for the United States. So I might be able to get permission from him, but I'm getting older, The first time I went, I'm a young guy on active duty, but now I'm 71, so I probably would need to hire a young Indiana Jones to go along, and it would take some money for that too. But I definitely want to go back there and do it. But I know it's expensive. Even if you want to park in front of a hotel in Cairo, you got to bribe the cop that's out there. Otherwise, he's going to give you a ticket. But that's how they make their living. The guy that I gave a bribe to at the Rafah crossing from Israel into Egypt, first he said, I told him where I was going. He said, you're not allowed over there. And I told him, well, hey, there's a general in Egypt who arranged for me to have a driver, and he's waiting right outside for me. And I told him, I pulled out my wallet and then kind of held it in my hand for a minute or so, and he looked at it, his eyes go wide, I can make it worth your while, and yeah, okay. So he took the money and he introduces me to his wife and his daughter, and takes it home. Then he goes out and he hires some friends from the area out there. Bir al Abd is the town that's nearest to where the Ark is. And we got a truck with low inflated tires to drive across the sand dunes around military checkpoints. And I got my 15 minutes of pictures out there, but it cost me. So that's how you do business. So I can't go over. I got a nice retirement, but I can't. I don't have a retirement that would fund an expedition like that. So that's the deal. On that. All right. Next question.
Yeah, go ahead. I was thinking about Gaza and what's going on down there, and the Israeli, the meetings that Bibi had with Putin, and Trump has one with Putin, and the boss was up there too. It seems like something is going on. What's your take on what's happening over there? They've pulled up their reserve forces. I read that they had instituted a draft in Israel, so they're obviously preparing for some sort of conflict.
Yeah. You have Iran that's pushing their luck as much as they can. And they really don't have much luck because every once in a while they'll piss off Israel, and Israel comes in and will blow away the base the Iranians are at. But basically they've been moving south. I don't know if the town is Dab or whatever. But they've been moving south very close to the Golan Heights. And they have sent within the last week, I think, another drone that the Israelis shot down into Israel. I think it got 6 miles in, but it was intercepted by a Patriot missile. But we don't know. If you're in Israel, you don't know if a drone's coming in just to take pictures or to spread poison gas or drop a bomb or what it's going to be or assassinate somebody. So every time that happens, Israel has to respond with a massive airstrike. And, of course, then we have the Russians, so close and working with the Iranians, there's always the possibility the Israelis are going to wipe out a bunch of Russians. Now, the U.S. did, in fact, earlier this year, kill, it was between 200 and 300 Russians at one base they hit. I think that was probably while we were going after Raqqa. I know we pretty much... we did what President Trump said we were going to do before he was elected. Yes. He said, "I'm going to bomb the you-know-what out of that place." And he did. He basically removed them from the face of the earth. The Russians were saying there was like nothing left there, zero. But when we went in there, we killed a bunch of Russians. And they didn't squawk about it because they knew they were guilty. They shouldn't have been where they've been. So this is all part of things that go on behind the scene. Most Americans have no clue. The news here is so slanted. All they want to talk about is Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, right.
They think that's what's important. The Iranians are getting closer, and the Israelis. Bibi went up to Moscow to lay down the law, and it's just this. If you let these people come in, we're going to devastate them. If we find any of them at a base with you, if we have to bomb the base and we have to kill all the Russians, we're going to do that too. So we don't want to do it. We got about 1 million Russian Jews, and so a lot of them are people that are not Jewish, but they claim to be Jewish, came from Russia, living in our country, and we hate to kill Russians. Don't make us do it. But when it comes to defense of Israel, if we have to do it, we'll do it. So just understand that. And I think Putin has some real respect for Netanyahu. Now, whether it's enough to force Iran out of Syria is the question. But Israel does not want the Syrian army on its border. It will not tolerate it on its border. And if it has to go into a full war, it will do that. Now, you do see a lot lately where Netanyahu is doing things like after one of these soccer matches. I think the Iranian team did well in one. So what does Bibi do? He comes on TV and he demonstrates his own soccer skills, with the ball. He's kicking with his feet and everything else and keep it in the air for a long time. And he's telling the Iranians, we're looking forward to the first game between Israel and Iran in Tehran. basically, after you overthrow your government, we want to be good friends again, So go for it. It's hard time over there. If anybody gets hurt, we're more than willing to help them with hospitals and everything, trying to lay it down. And the Iranians are hurting right now. They took all that money from that $151.7 billion that the traitor Obama gave them, to develop nuclear weapons, and to arm Hamas and Hezbollah. They took that money and they spent it on arms. They spent it on those terrorist organizations and gave things to people. So the unemployment rate in Iran is very high right now. Also, they don't even have good fresh water supplies. And Israel's has offered to help them to develop a good system. Israel gets a lot of its water by desalination. So Israel can help an awful lot, but you got to have a government in Tehran that's not homicidal. And it used to be that the biggest Israeli embassy in the world was not in the United States; it was in Tehran. So as a Jew, when I look back at Iran and Persia before it, a couple of thoughts. Obviously, since the Islamic Revolution, Israel's been horrendous enemies, talking about exterminating the Jewish people. Well, we had somebody in Iran in ancient times who was like that. His name was Haman. And the book of Esther talks about this Iranian or Persian prime minister who went to the king Ahasuerus and said, hey, let's exterminate the Jews. The king says, okay, until he finds out his wife Esther is really Jewish, and then she turns the table and has him hung. And a few other people, and that few other people, I think the total came to be, and this astounds people, and even me. It's hard to read it as a Jew. We killed 75,000 people that were armed against us, in that. So we have that history of hatred, because these are people who are ready to exterminate us. On the other hand, thanks to Esther, his wife, but King Ahasuerus, didn't do it, and then we had a Persian king named Cyrus that allowed us to rebuild the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So I mean that was fantastic what he did, and in fact in the Hebrew, when it mentions him in our Bible, it uses the word Mashiach, which is the same word, which is Messiah. That he was like a Messiah to the Jewish people. He got us out of bondage, he brought us back to Israel, and he let us build a temple. Which stood for like another 700 years until the Romans knocked it down. So,
sounds like Trump.
Yeah. So, and Trump, by the way, I hope he continues. He's been like the closest thing to a Messiah that I've seen in my life. I just hope he can handle the current situation. And I think there's a good chance that when he walked into that room with Putin could have come up with God knows what, even an alien, dead or alive or whatever. But he could have come up with absolute proof. This is what the situation is, and it may be that Trump was absolutely dumbfounded when he saw it. There's certain things that are associated with this that if you see them, you're not going to be the same. And at least it's going to take a while to recover. This is the poor president also, he's always traveling from one half of the world to the other and going through all these time zones. The guy gets no sleep as it is. So you pour something like that on in the middle of it all. And, he may not have been the sharpest knife in the drawer after he saw that. And he's got to figure out, well, geez, I thought I had it all figured out, and now I got to worry about the War of the Worlds or something coming on. I'm going to need the Russians for this, because they've been in it from the beginning. From the beginning. I detail how on my site, but again, this is where I get the most. This is where I got an actual threat from the government. I knew it was dangerous when I published it. Naming every scientist involved. But on the other hand, it was the closest that I was likely to get in my life to any kind of real evidence that these things are real and need to be taken seriously. I saw one on my 10th birthday, but it's not so. A lot of other people seen UFOs. That doesn't mean that much, and anybody can claim anything. But I put out enough there that if somebody wanted to follow a trail, they could. The problem being that the media is so absolutely under control of the deep state. You know, I mean, and as far as the deep state goes, I'm dealing with it directly. When I saw how much was controlled by this one particular place, it's like the definition of the deep state. And I know they're listening in on this tonight. They'll hear it, especially I posted the link for sure. They're gonna listen to this show. And all I can say to them is that, like the Torah tells us, we have a choice between the blessing and the curse, between life and death. I hope I'm not making a choice here for death, but I'm going to ask them to make a choice for life. I'm going to ask them to do what's right in accordance with our Constitution, and what do we need to do to defend the planet, not only the country, but the planet against any threats that would be out there. They may have a different way of doing it, but my heart's in the right place for what it's worth. I don't know that means a damn thing to the deep state. But man, the deep state, you see with Strzok and everything else, how totally evil they are, and they're in control of so much of our government right now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Trump, when he says he wants to drain the swamp, I mean, it's almost like walking into Washington single-handedly and having to take out almost every member of government and say, "Get the hell out of here," and then find some honest people and put them in. But he's got a Herculean task. He's got a task that probably only a real Messiah could accomplish. And you got people like Clapper or Brennan out there from the previous administrations with the CIA. You know, that are absolute trash.
Yes.
And absolutely disloyal. And he's got to deal with these people. You know, I mean, it was all the cards were stacked against him from the beginning. So a lot of times I feel bad when I see what I'm up against, and then I think about the president and other people that want to do good and the problems that they face. And you know, you got some of them. You got Flynn about to probably go to jail. You got other people, you know, just associated with Trump in any way, and they get sent off to jail, you know, because they're looking for something to get on the president.
We got about 3 minutes left, a little less than 3 minutes. Larry, you got a question?
Well, I was just going to ask Barry to give out his locations again, where people can go on the internet and you know, how to reach him. Okay,
I've got 3 websites. The first one is the one that gets the most activity, and where I have where I'm not afraid to speak my mind on any issue, and that's arccode.com, and that's spelled A-R-K, not a C, ARKCODE.com. That's the one where right now I'm developing this whole thing on the dust storms, and it'll go over to the other sites later. The second site is named after my son, DavidARoffman.com. That's DavidARoffman, Roffman, 2 F's like in Frank or Foxtrot. DavidARoffman.com. And that deals with breakthrough propulsion physics, although most of that stuff is like 6-7 years old at least. But it deals with Mars. It has all the latest stuff on Mars over there. And usually when I write Mars information or stuff, I put it on his site first because that people are allowed to get through there. The third one, if you can get through, is MarsCorrect.com, MarsCorrect, MarsCorrect.com. And as far as I can tell, except for if I mention it on a show like this, maybe I'll get a few hits. But basically, the only ones that are on that site are our U.S. government, and that's about it. That has all the Mars stuff on it, and the only reason that it gets so few hits, and then I think the government restricts it, is that on the article that's entitled Gil Levin Part 2, I name everybody that was involved in back engineering the stuff that I do before. And that's a dangerous thing to do. Gil Levin is a scientist who did Viking 1 and Viking 2 labeled release experiments, and both found life on Mars, 4,000 miles apart.
Well,
so that's where to find me.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll have to do this again and maybe spend a little more time. I know your research continues. And thanks for coming on again. And Larry, thank you for coming on.
I appreciate
So we'll see you all later.
From both of you and your friendship.
Thank
Have
you.
Have a great one.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for listening, everybody.